Hello and welcome to another episode of the Transportation Exchange Podcast presented by Rush Truck Stands of Canada. I'm your host, Jason Cuddy. On today's episode, we're excited to welcome back Mr. Mike Millian, the president of PMTC. Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here, Jason.
So today we wanted to have a little chat about something that the PMTC has been heavily involved with, which is the National Supply Chain Task Force. So we thought we would bring you in and kind of get us up to speed on what it's all about, how it impacts the industry, and kind of the PMTC's role as far as how it impacts, what we're looking at going forward.
And no, thanks, and appreciate the opportunity. So the actual task force began back in January of 2022, I guess. And it was initially put in place because of the catastrophic floods that we'd seen in BC,
right,
in the fall of 2021, as well as the supply chain restraints that we had seen as a result of COVID the last 2 years, with port congestion and labor shortages and everything else. So the task force was put together to try and explore opportunities that we could make our supply chain more resilient within Canada as well as globally. So the transport minister put together a task force of chairs, and then the chairs had an initial meeting in January, and then they reached out and did individual meetings with stakeholders and associations. PMTC had theirs in February, and then we had another one with them back in August of this year, so not that long ago. Mm-hmm. Gave our opinions verbally, provided written opinions as to how we thought things should go, and then that task force released their final report just about a month ago.
Gotcha. So, there's some key items I think that you guys especially identified within the press release that you guys were involved with. Maybe kind of walk us through what each one is and how it kind of plays out from your side.
Yeah, and in their final report, they did do a number of the ones that we recommended, so we were glad to see that. And of course, that report then goes to the government, and then it's up to the government as to whether they implement any of these things or not. But and obviously, the task force was talking about trucking, marine, air. Obviously, our association, we put most of our thoughts towards the road infrastructure and priorities. As a result of that's who Private Motor Truck Council of Canada, that's who we represent. But so a couple of the important ones that we asked them to put in place that they did, twinning of Highway 185 between New Brunswick and Quebec. And what that allows, if you get that highway twinned, is you can have an LCV network that can operate from Windsor straight through to the East Coast.
Gotcha.
Right now what happens is there's a stretch in Quebec where they have to detach the two LCVs, and then two trucks have to take it about an 85-kilometer trip on a 2-lane road till it gets into New Brunswick, and then they can couple it together again. So by finishing that stretch, you're removing the requirement to have two drivers to go that short stretch, removing GHGs from the road, and obviously improving efficiencies. That is one of the things they put in the report. We also asked for better access to funding. As you know, it's not declared a skilled trade.
Yeah.
With MELT in place, most of the province, you're looking at most of the country, you're looking at $8,000 to $10,000. And with the only funding really being unemployment, which doesn't always give you your best employees,
right?
Because they may not be there because they want to be there. They're being there to stay on it. It's a barrier to a lot of people entering the industry. So we've asked for more consistent funding to be put in place while we are hopefully waiting for this eventually to be declared a skilled trade. And that is one of the recommendations that they went forward with as well. Trucking HR Canada has a career expressway program, and people can go to Trucking HR Canada, and they've been given a lot of money by the government to move forward with this. So you can access training dollars through them that is provided by the government. So that is one thing that the committee recommended they move forward with, and we were glad to see that.
That's good. Yeah, that's been a big challenge that's come up on conversation with many people over the last couple of years, is the lack of this being a skilled trade, which, clearly the requirement to operate these vehicles is a skill. And, now we have regulations as far as the type of training required, almost as if it's a skilled trade, but you're just missing that one little piece to try and, like you said, close the gap and get funding, because to go through that training isn't cheap, as you've mentioned, but it's required to get the job. So you've got this big barrier to entry, which you didn't have kind of before. So you're halfway there, but you need to kind of, cross the finish line. So hopefully this helps push it forward.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one step at a time, I guess you'd say. But I mean, eventually we would like to see this declared a skilled trade, almost like a red seal, where you get into apprenticeship, where, the entry level training, what we like to call that is pre-employment training.
Right.
And then we need pre-license training. And then we need post-license training, which is done at the carrier.
Yeah.
And that's almost where your apprenticeship or red seal program would come in. But if we can get it declared a skilled trade and then move into these post-training requirements, I think it'll help a lot.
Well, no help. And the nice part is the layout is there of how to do it, obviously, right? I mean, we see it, even within the industry, like on the technician side, right? It's a skilled trade. So you have an apprenticeship program, you have co-op programs with schools that allow students to come in, do half and half, do some theory, do some practical. Then you've got someone already into it and engaged in, in your company, or at least in the industry. And then you walk them through the process. They become an employee and you keep going. And, it's one way to get people to come into the industry at a younger age as well. And I think it creates, more of a career path when it becomes a skilled trade versus, what it's thought of today for a lot of people. It changes the optics, I think, in the thought process of it.
For sure. And there's a lot of carriers in the industry who already have these mentorship programs, we'll call them, and very, very well developed, lengthy programs where they mentor them when they come in, these new students. But the problem is the carriers that are doing it are the best in class, but It's not required. So you still have a bunch of carriers that maybe aren't doing it and don't put the resources towards it. And for the newly licensed driver to have the best opportunity to succeed in the industry, there needs to be follow-up training done after you get your license. Like, you're fully trained. You don't go to medical school and then start performing heart surgery, right?
And stop all training.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the way we need to think about it. And a lot of good carriers do, but it almost needs to become mandatory at some point to make sure everybody does it.
And the mandatory helps keep an even playing field, because obviously the ones that are doing it, it's great, and it's the right thing to do for the industry and for their business. But it's a cost to their business, which in tight economic times, that's cost that's not going against the cost to perform the business for their customers. So it could increase their rates to the customers, which could make them uncompetitive. So yes, there's a skill that's involved with what the customer is getting at the end, but as we see a lot of times, price wins a lot of battles, and if you're not investing that much money, you're going to get the business. So this, again, will help hopefully level the playing field.
Yeah, for sure. Some of the other things we asked for as well, again, on that labor, I mean, we have a shortage of
28,000
truck driving positions right now, right? So we're second highest in the country for vacancies, right behind hospitality.
Wow.
So we've asked for continued and increased support and increased access to temporary foreign workers for the trucking industry. But the key thing we pointed out to the task force, though, is yes, we need immigration. We need to provide access to these individuals to work within the trucking industry. Whether people agree with it or not, all you have to do is look at our birth rate numbers. Yep. We are not sustainable, and we can't sustain the employment numbers we need unless we are bringing more people in. But the program we want, the shortage in the trucking industry isn't temporary. Yep. So the temporary foreign worker program needs to be made sure that it's provided as a access to permanent residency to stay here. We don't need the drivers for 6 months. Right. It's been a long-term issue. And it's almost like a vetted process that we should have, because yes, we need to increase the amount of access that the industry has to temporary foreign workers, but we have to make sure that the people that come into this country are given the best opportunity to succeed in this industry and are provided the training and support necessary to make them safe out on our highways to protect us as well as them.
Right.
There was a Globe and Mail report in 2019 that showed this. And unfortunately, if it's not vetted properly, what happens is these individuals come in looking for a way to get permanent residency into Canada.
Yep.
They are preyed upon by consultants who charge them a fee to get them a job, provide training maybe, if they're lucky. A lot of cases in BC they weren't. Mm-hmm. Partner them up with a carrier, and in some cases the carrier is paying a fee to this consultant to get them. And then they are not trained properly, they're not treated properly, and they're not paid properly. Right. And all that does is once they get their license and then get their permanent residency into Canada, because they're not treated properly, they don't stay in the industry. Right? They move on into something else. which doesn't do us any good, doesn't do them any good. So we need to make sure it's vetted properly, and that requires the federal government to look into this harder in the vetting process and to coordinate more with the provinces and territories. The Globe and Mail report showed one case. There was a carrier in 2018 who was fined almost $200,000 because they unfair labor practices, and they were paying below minimum wage. Okay. 2 weeks later, they got approved to bring in more foreign workers. So the left hand isn't talking to the right. So we need better access to it, but we also need better oversight of the program to make sure that it is being done properly. And one thing that the CTA's put out there, and we fully agree with them on this, is almost a vetted process where only carriers who have been approved and are proven to have safety policies and procedures, a program in place to integrate these individuals into their trucking company and into their community, that have safety ratings that are satisfactory or above.
Right.
A vetted process where only carriers who are going to treat the individuals properly can apply to bring these employees in here, because it's better for the employees and it's better for the safety of our roads.
Makes sense. And it's almost sort of kind of going back to, we talked about the companies that invested into, proper training programs, that they maybe if this rolls out properly, they could be the first, benefactors of something like this, because they've already established good processes. They're usually top rated carriers, similar to the LCV process. You had to prove, without a doubt, certain safety standards. So it's kind of a win-win. Look, if you're willing to invest into the industry and make sure you're running, the best of the best companies, we'll give you access to additional foreign workers going through a certain process, but we know they'll succeed with you. We're not just going to throw them everywhere and just see where the chips land. So that's a good way to do it. And I think, the federal government also announced recently that I think by 2025, they, open it up to another 500,000 of foreign immigration. So, the door's there as far as they recognize that we need it. So hopefully we can latch on to that number and pull in a huge amount of skilled labor that, can then tie into these companies and help, fill the gap in the industry.
Yeah, well, because there's two things we need, right? Like the labor shortage that we're seeing now isn't just in the trucking industry.
Right.
This is a Canada-wide, a worldwide labor shortage that we're seeing right now. So we're not only competing to get individuals into our industry, we're competing against every other industry that is now looking for employees.
Yeah.
So there's two things. We have to get them into the industry, show them the opportunities that are here, but then once they get here, we got to make sure they are treated properly, trained properly, and given the best opportunities to succeed so they stay here. Because if they just come in and leave, it doesn't help anybody.
Done nothing, You've accomplished nothing.
Yeah.
But
another thing we asked for too, it's kind of political turmoil right now, but the fast processing centers have been open on the U.S. side of the border.
Right.
They haven't been open on the Canadian side of the border. They've been closed since March of 2020. So we've pushed that be open, and the supply chain did support that as well. It's kind of political issues right now, because basically what it is when the U.S. workers come up here to do the interviews on this side.
Yeah.
But the issue with it is about whether they are given diplomatic immunity when they're doing that job. So it's a whole bunch of political infighting that's going on with it. But we still need to see that done to get rid of some of the backlog.
Yeah.
One of the things that they didn't put forward in the recommendation that we were a little disappointed about was we also would like to see the Trans-Canada Highway twinned from coast to coast.
Right.
There's a long section through Northern Ontario that isn't twinned. And then you get into BC, there's sections that aren't twinned.
Right.
The bridge failure in Nipigon in 2017, I believe it was, 2016, 2017, that basically fractured our country from coast to coast.
Yes.
The floods that happened in BC last fall when sections of Highway 1 and the Coquihalla, all we had was one access road on the south, which is a road that trucks don't like to use that much, the Crow's Nest Pass. If you don't have redundancy in your major cross-border infrastructures, you are very vulnerable to these issues that we've run into a couple times, and now you're severing east-west trade. So we really need to be looking at a multi-lane divided highway that goes from coast to coast, so at least you have some redundancy. If one side fractures, hopefully the other side is still available to you.
Yeah.
And that's one that they didn't recommend. And we also need to look at having a national plan to build rest areas on our main highways. It's an issue the trucking industry has been complaining about for years. You get up into the remote areas of our country. It may be hard to find places to park. Northern Ontario, Northern BC, Northern almost anywhere in the country. Yeah. In addition to the main areas, there's an extreme lack of parking.
Yes.
And that's people's work conditions, which kind of acts to a deterrent to coming into the industry if you don't think you're going to be able to find a safe place to park, rest, and go to the washroom. So
yeah, that's fair. I mean, they need to stop, they need to rest, and you want it to be safe, you want it to be accessible, and also have enough room, right? It's great if it's a new facility, but if it only has 10 spots and 10 people are there, you're out of luck. So I know from the Ontario side, they're doing a lot to change the inspection stations and upgrade those and provide more parking and give it, a bit better infrastructure, but that'll take some time. But that's mainly along the 401 corridor. Like you said, you go north, and I've seen it for years going up north to see family is, you could stop in the little towns along the way, to get a coffee, washroom break, motels are all in. But now that, they've bypassed all the little towns, I get it from a economic point of view to keep the stuff moving, but because of that, you don't have these little rest stops on the way that you could pull off. There's nowhere to stop, unless pulling right off the highway and going into a town, which probably isn't truck friendly, as far as logistically getting through. So, it's great they twinned that highway, but they kind of forgot about why you did it, kind of for some aspects. So. Yeah, there's some oversight needs to be done and provide these guys with proper, safe places to stop that have facilities that they can use and access, especially, technology-wise, everything that needs to kind of, be updated as we go forward.
Well, and when you get up into the, into the north, you also have a stretch between Long Lac and Nipigon where it's over 100 kilometers between two towns.
Yeah.
Right? And there's nothing in between those two towns.
Yeah.
Right. So we... although they complain about a parking shortage as well, and by they I mean the U.S., if you go into the U.S. and look at the way their interstate system is set up, in almost every state you go into, there's a publicly funded rest area about every 30 miles.
Yeah, easily. Yeah, and I just came back from Ohio. I did that drive, and there's a rest area, there's a text area, there's a truck shop, but there's something that you can pull off safely off the side of the road. It'll have some sort of facilities available for you to tap into, and it's frequent enough, right?
Yeah.
Okay, if that one's full, I can get to the next one, right? Kind of thing. And that's kind of what we lack from the infrastructure from that point of view, for sure.
For sure. And I guess the good news would be on this, so that the task force was put together, they issued their final report, and then the government has also put together a standing committee on transport infrastructure and communities, which is looking into labor shortages in our supply chain. And the PMTC was invited to speak to that on October 17th, along with a bunch of other stakeholders. So, basically you had this report that was commissioned and then a standing committee that was put together. So hopefully we have some movement going, because, what we need to see, and it was brought up in the standing committee by several people that were questioning us, the report's great, and the government putting these task force together is great. But what's really going to make a difference on this is whether we actually start to implement this stuff, and it has to happen quickly. If we just have another report that sits up on a shelf with all the other reports that have been done, it doesn't do us any good. So it's good that we've got here, but the key point in making sure these things are a success is now implementing and starting to implement it in short periods of time, not 3, 4, 5 years down the road.
Right. And that'll be the key. And like I said, there's quite a few on here that don't require a lot of, say, heavy infrastructure. Obviously, 20 of highways and that, those get approved. That's a huge, task. But obviously, you can talk about the immigration part. There's already pieces in play there that you can work off of. So, it shouldn't be monumental to get a lot of these going, but they got to do it, right? Otherwise, like you said, it's great. I'm glad we did it. A lot of good ideas adopted, but without implementation, it was just a nice idea.
Yeah, for sure. That's always the key point, is acting on your recommendations.
Exactly. Well, we'll stay in close contact as the new year rolls through, and we'll see what comes out, and maybe we'll reconnect again on kind of what happened versus what was suggested, and who knows, maybe there's another task force or what happens. But we'll stay in close contact with you as far as this rolls out. But I do want to thank you for coming on and sharing us, kind of give us the highlights of what was involved, the PMTC's involvement with it, and hopefully what we will see coming for the industry in the near future.
Thanks for the invitation. Enjoyed it.
Well, that concludes today's episode. I want to thank Mike from the PMTC for joining us. And to catch up on past episodes, check out transportationexchangepodcast.ca. And until next time, thanks for listening.